titled Active Travel, Business as Usual or Time for a New Normal. And just by way of introduction, you know, it's for everybody, the pandemic has forced us to change the way in which we do things. And a recent BBC Maury poll found that about 40% of people intended to walk more, 32% intended to work more from home, about the same to shop locally, 28% to cycle more. And even the Automobile Association asked their 20,000 motorists, and a fifth of them said they wanted to drive less. So this leads us to the concept of active travel as a kind of a thing that brings all of those things together. So, and I think today what I'd like to explore is what do we mean by active travel? And is it the solution for some of these things that people are saying they want to do? So I'm absolutely delighted to have three speakers who are really passionate about this particular subject. The first person I'd like to introduce is Dame Sarah Storey. She's the Sheffield City Region's Active Travel Commissioner. She's had that role since 2019. She was appointed by Dan Jarvis, our elected mayor for the Sheffield City Region. So you might also know her as our most decorated Paralympic athlete, or at least she was last time I looked. And Sarah will be going to the Olympic Games, the Paralympics this year. I hope. Sarah, how's it going? How's training and how's selection going?
Training is going well, actually, really well. I'm racing again now in the UK at least, so that's all good news. Selection is going to be made after the Road World Championships, which I'm going to go to 2 weeks today, racing the following week. And I've torn up my plan for Tokyo so many times, and literally even this morning, we've changed where the pre-camp's going to be. Just trying to second guess travel, you know, countries, green, amber, red, the isolations. We've both had our vaccine, me and my husband, so we've both had two, so that should make life easier, but it's not yet, so it's been a challenge. But you never get to a good thing without a bit of adversity. Right,
great. Well, we'll be looking out for you on TV and in the news. Yeah, hopefully you'll get selected. So today you're here, you're going to talk about active travel. You're our Active Travel Commissioner. And could you please share with us a little bit about your philosophy as Active Travel Commissioner?
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for being with us this lunchtime. It's fantastic to be able to speak to you, and like Steve said, if you have any comments or anything that you'd like to pop into the chat, please do, and we're always happy to answer questions and trying to clarify things as to how this agenda fits into where you sit within the region or within the wider population. So yeah, please do ask away. So as Steve said, I was appointed the Active Travel Commissioner by the Mayor Dan Jarvis in April of 2019. An Active Travel Commissioner is another way of saying the Walking and Cycling Commissioner, and we have Will Norman in London, Chris Boardman in Greater Manchester, Simon O'Brien in Liverpool, and Lee Craigie is the Active Nation Commissioner in Scotland, and together we form a commissioners group which works nationally to try and ensure that we're working together, we're collaborating, and we're also sharing best practice. So when I came in 2019, it was really to set as quickly as I could a strategy. Lots of people were talking about how far behind everyone was compared to London and Manchester, and how we needed to get onto this programme. And it was something that Dan Jarvis recognised as soon as he was elected in the summer of 2018. He said in that part of that manifesto he would prioritise active travel and place it at the heart of his transport strategy. And so I was appointed, and we very quickly recruited Pete, who you'll be hearing from next, to make sure that we could create a vision for the next 20 years, 19 years now, and to make sure that we could deliver on that and support our local authority partners with best practice and to enable people to feed into that process. So the first slide here shows you a picture of a snapshot of our interactive map. So when I first came into post, I made 4 pledges to make sure that people could see the direction that we were heading, the philosophy that we would use behind the work, and to make sure that they could believe that this was something that could come to fruition. And the interactive map was a key part of this, and it was launched in September 2019, and it very, very quickly garnished lots and lots of support, and especially over in the West, as you can see, a very, very engaged population in the city of Sheffield. And as we've gone through, we've utilised this interactive map. We added a COVID layer just over 12 months ago so that people could tell us what was happening in their communities with regards to the challenges of social distancing. And as we started to ease that very first lockdown just around 12 months ago, people needed to remain socially distanced. It was obviously before that mandatory mask mandate. So we were talking to local authorities, explaining what people had told us, and the comments on this map helped us to really formulate that plan. So when we're talking about whether this is business as usual or time for a new normal, I think it's a little bit of both, because as you can see, we were well prepared for a strategy before COVID hit. But one of the things that COVID did was really accelerate people's vision and people's focus on activity, because of course one of the 4 reasons we could leave the house 12 months ago or just over 12 months ago was to take daily exercise. Traffic levels plummeted to things that we had to levels that we hadn't seen since the 1950s. And as you can see from the next slide, where we talk about what we were doing in 2020 before the pandemic hit, this photograph was actually taken on budget day as we went to speak to Andrew Gilligan at number 10 Downing Street. Myself and the then Director of Strategic Transport Infrastructure and Housing, Mark Lynham, on the right, with the Mayor as well. We went to speak to them about the vital importance of engaging active travel at the heart of all transport strategies from a national perspective. It was something we were keen to do within the regions, but we can't do that without that support from national government. And we think that some of the work that we did in going to visit number 10 and speaking to them, supplying them with a copy of our interactive map and our active travel implementation plan, enabled some of the work that you saw come through during May and June last year. Off the back of the meeting, and as the pandemic hit and lockdown ensued, myself and Dan Jarvis wrote to the Prime Minister saying that as we eased lockdown, as we started to look at that very first roadmap, and when we were coming out of level 4 down to level 3, we needed to prioritise active travel and space for active travel, so that while public transport systems were still running at lower capacity, we had space for people to move around. And we were very successful with that. And one of the things we identified within the course of the pandemic, and some things that we'd also identified prior to the pandemic hitting, was the fact that some of the key issues have always been around short journeys being made in vehicles. And that was a big problem during the pandemic, the first lockdown as well. People were being told, let's not use our vehicles, let's make those short journeys on foot or by bike, because not only will you have an extra slot of exercise in your day, you'll also be keeping vehicles off the road, reducing the chance of a collision, and making sure that we can free up that space to protect the NHS. And if there's one thing I could have wished for in January of this year when lockdown 3 hit, is that same message was reiterated, because I think although it was the winter time, we all experienced a very different lockdown 3, where traffic levels did go down somewhat, but not anywhere near to the levels that we saw in April of last year. And I think although the weather was a challenge and there was plenty of snow, certainly where I live, people would have been more inclined to continue to use active means if the roads had felt safe enough. And safety is one of those big conversation pieces, and something that we're trying to closely engage with continually with South Yorkshire Police. One of the problems that constantly happens, and this is even before the pandemic as well, is that active travel infrastructure is plagued with parked vehicles. And overall, one of the harshest conversations we need to have is how do we reduce the number of vehicles that we own as a population? Because there's just too many. And year on year, more and more vehicles have come to our streets, but we just don't have the space to build more road space. And if we did build more road space, the only thing that would do would be to attract even more vehicles. So our active travel economy is absolutely vital, because we need to see how active travel can integrate into everyday lives, help build activity back into our lives, as it did when we were so reduced in our activities during that lockdown, but also how we can utilise the active travel economy to recover from COVID. Places with high levels of active travel have seen their local high streets recover more quickly. And also creating more pedestrianisation increases footfall. And it's a really crucial point that we should never forget, that when we talk about active travel, people instantly think about bikes, but actually what we're talking about, the most common, the most well-used form of active travel is walking. And it's often overlooked. It's not valued as a form of mainstream transport, but it really is the most vital tool we have for so many reasons, for our health as well as for our transport system. And so if we start to talk about how these things can work and support you, active travel friendly workplaces is something that's starting to become much more of a talking point. And the stats that you see on the slide here really reiterate what Steve said earlier with regards to that research that was done. But active travel friendly workplaces are becoming things that people are asking for more and more. People experienced during the course of that first lockdown some of the things that we'd been planning for prior to the pandemic. The idea that we could use our feet, use our legs, use our wheelchairs if you're going to use a wheelchair to move around, use our mobility scooters, use our scooters, electric scooters, use our bikes, use our e-bikes, use our cargo bikes. We could utilize all of those things to move around, and people are now starting to think, I'd actually quite like to do that continually. I'd like to see my workplace support me to be more active. And so there are things that we can do as a population to encourage our employers to engage and to provide facilities to make active travel easier. But active travel isn't just that commute to and from a workplace. It's also enabling a population to be able to utilize activity within their day. So we're starting to see more and more people value the opportunity for walking meetings, for example. And even if you're working remotely, it might be sticking your headphones into your phone and going for a walk whilst your colleague on the other end of the line does exactly the same thing. And these behavioural changes and habits are really, really important as we start to look forward and start to think about how we're going to be able to support the population to utilise the infrastructure that we're so desperately trying to pull through the pipeline as quickly as we can. So the next point is about that pipeline, and I'm going to be able to hand over now to Pete, who's going to give you a little bit more detail on that.
Sarah, thank you very much for that overview of your philosophy. While we change over the slides, you've been in post for 2 years and about a month. If there was one thing you'd like to share with us that you've learned, what's the one thing that you've learned in the last 2 years that you'd like to share with us?
I think one of the things that I sort of subconsciously knew but needed to consciously acknowledge more is that the same messages don't work for everybody. So you have to talk to people and find a hook that brings them into why this is valuable to them, why this is of use to them. Because for so many communities, the aspiration is to own a vehicle because that's seen as the mode of transport that will access opportunities for them. And I hadn't really fully associated that. I have the idealistic view of, bikes are just the most beautiful thing. It's my most favorite way of moving around. So you should all think that. And that's obviously the not so youthful exuberance that I have for the subject, but I think it's really important that we develop our discussion points and the points that we make to people to help with the myth busting, because one of the biggest challenges over the past couple of years, and certainly in the past year, has been the influence that the press has. A lot of fake news out there with regards to what's happening in active travel. We have two components within active travel, predominantly anyway. We have active travel lanes and we have low traffic neighbourhoods, and it's something Pete will touch on when he speaks next. And some of the urban myths around both of those and reallocation of road space and what that does to the surrounding community, rather than putting across the positive, has been a big challenge. So yeah, it's about finding that way of speaking to people in a way that they will understand and engage in the best way for them.
Great, thank you, Sarah. That's really helpful. Some questions are starting to go into the chat box. Just a reminder, start posing your questions. We'll try and make sure that we get to those before the end of the session. I want to move on now to our next speaker, who is Pete Zanzottera, or Pete Z, as he's known by many people, because nobody knows how many Zs or Ts are really in his name. He's the Active Travel Programme Director for the Sheffield City Region Mayoral Combined Authority. He's worked in sustainable travel for the last 30 years. He walks, cycles, runs everywhere he can. He has the best shirts of anyone I know. And also he has circus skills. I do need to ask you, can you unicycle, Pete?
Yeah, I can unicycle better than I can operate my computer at the moment, Steve. I don't know what you guys can see, actually, because my computer's gone a bit weird.
Oh, that really has, hasn't it? Save this document and refresh it with updates. I would maybe exit your PowerPoint and go back into it again.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
If you're having trouble, we could move straight on to Maxine. Just try again.
I'll give you one more go, because it's always, it's always hilarious when this kind of thing happens, isn't it?
So many
If
years
only we'd had a test run of this technology beforehand.
We did. My computer was behaving in a completely different way.
and this is
I'm going to try now and see what you can see.
Go on.
I'll take the blame for this because I made him change the presentation. There you go.
It's those merged slides that did it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I liked it. There we go.
You're
How's
looking
that
good,
work?
Pete.
Right.
There we go, Steve.
Well done. Well done. Yeah, but you are used to street theatre, so here we go. I'll hand over to you, Pete. Please tell us what's going on in the Sheffield City region. What are we actually doing? What's going in?
Well, yes, Steve. So my street theatre was a kind of slightly shambolic comedy performance. So I've started off in that mode. So I'll just carry on. The first thing I want to say is just a few days ago, I came to this this slide to encapsulate the realization. If anybody's in any doubt what we need, it's fewer vehicles driven less often. If you look at a whole panoply of issues that we face, the best solution is fewer vehicles owned. Less owned vehicles, certainly, but also driven less often. There isn't any other way out of this, really. I'm just going to talk to you very much about the pipeline. And I think some of you may not know this very completely techie business that we have to get involved in terms of delivering safe infrastructure. The first thing we have to do is we have to build a kind of strategic outline business case and build a bid that is for money. The next thing we have to do is create an outline business case that shows, pretty much what we're going to do, but it's not fully formed, and we know what the benefits are, but we know where it is, how much it's going to cost. And then the last bit is where we build a full business case. And I'm involved in that process several stages along the way to check that what we're having proposed to be built actually fits the guidelines that we have in the MCA and the government guidelines, which are called very boringly LTN 120, Local Transport Note in 2020. It was the first one. It was the first one for donkey's years, to be honest. So this, I was talking about before we started this seminar, this slide took about 6 months to build. Not to actually make, well, it did take a long time to make the slide, but it actually involved going around our local authority partners and saying, if we got everything right by 2040, what would the network look like? And I take you back to what Sarah was talking about. There's two really important components to this. The first one is a connected network of active travel lanes. If we built the motorway and car system the way we build cycle lanes, people would look at it and say, there's nobody on it, because we build big stretches of motorway with no earthly way of connecting to it. And that was one of the issues we faced in South Yorkshire, was there were lots of some really good bits of infrastructure, but they really didn't link up, and they didn't take somebody from where they live to where they needed to go. So the first thing is a connected network of routes, and I hope you can see that this is a fairly comprehensive one for South Yorkshire. The second one is active neighbourhoods. Some people have called these low traffic neighbourhoods, but it's not low traffic, it's high traffic, but it's the right sort of traffic, because people walking is traffic, people cycling is traffic, people going on skateboards is traffic. So you'll see on this map, there are lots of light blue areas. Those are the low traffic neighbourhoods, the ones where we're cutting down the vehicles. So they were originally called low traffic, but now they're the active neighbourhoods because we've linked them up with a network of routes so everybody can be active in their neighbourhood. And if they want to go a bit further afield, they can take the bike or link with public transport. So that was the slide that took 6 months to work on. This slide took me personally a week to work on, because each of the bids has all of these routes in, but I had to pull out all these routes and put them on a map to show where we are. So this is the current pipeline of about 80 to 100 million pounds worth of infrastructure to be built in the next 2 years. And I just want to superimpose that on top of the other one. So there's lots of people thinking, we're not making any progress. We haven't got anything where I live. And for some people, that isn't going to be the case. But actually, for some people, it is going to be the case. And I suppose the most important thing to share with you is I live in Armley in Leeds. And if anybody had said in 2010, you're going to be able to get on your bike, Pete, and cycle all the way to Bradford on a segregated superhighway, people would have laughed you out the house. But yet, that's what I can do. There is an active travel lane. There's a cycle superhighway that goes right from East Leeds all the way to Bradford. And, you know, for those people that have it, it's really good, but we can only build it one bit at a time. So this is my interpretation of what the pipeline is. It would take a lot longer to say exactly where the pipeline, what the pipeline is, because each of those routes is somewhere between the outline business case and the full business case, and then it goes to delivery. So we have got a pipeline stocked with stuff to deliver right now. The next thing for us to feed the next lot of schemes, because all of my local authorities colleagues are working flat out just to deliver this. We're going to build some extra capacity to do the next bit. I'm going to hand it to you, Steve.
Great, thanks, Pete. Wow, that was really good. The questions are flowing, and actually, I just want to ask you, you know, one of our questions in terms of, you know, pipeline development. John Cowley and Sarah are having a bit of a conversation here about developing low traffic neighbourhoods, whatever you might call it. How do people get involved? How do they get their ideas onto that pipeline map? You know, and how long, you know, is it like to take to empower people to get that to happen?
Well, if you're in any doubt, first thing is to say what's wrong and say what you'd like to happen. The original interactive map was for that. It's still open. You can still do that. But I think that the other thing to recognize is it's not about us parachuting in a neighborhood solution to you. It's about you and the people down your street and the people in your area talking to each other and saying it would be so much better if we did this, because the more people you get in neighborhoods to develop these ideas, the better it's going to be. So we have some neighborhoods on there that are our testing ground, because we only really have one new active neighborhood in the whole of the city region, which is in Kelham Island, although we have lots of places where some of the components of an active neighborhood are there. So if you look at Old Town in Barnsley, there's lots of streets that are shut off to stop the through traffic going through. So we do have lots of the components. So it's about you talking to your friends and neighbors. And if you have a neighborhood forum, get involved with your local politicians and make this an active debate. And I think it's about doing that right now when we know my favorite phrase, Steve, is behavior. Travel behavior is plastic right now. It's in a state where it can be molded. It doesn't need to be elastic. You don't need to just cycle for a bit and then go back to what you were doing before. We're thinking, will we work a 2-3-2 week, a 1-4-2 week? How will we do this? If we do that, can we do something that will mold our behavior and get everybody else around us to create that neighborhood?
Brilliant. Great. Thank you, Pete. Hopefully that's partly answered John's question. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Maxine Gregory. Delighted to have Max here. She's been at Sheffield University for 20 years. In 2015, she led a report that had Sheffield calling itself the outdoor city. So she was the person that proved how much the outdoors was important to Sheffield. She's an advisor to the Department for Transport on various projects. 2019, before Sarah arrived, she led a review on active travel, which was handed over to Sarah as part of the information pack for when she started. And she's also just led on a project asking the question, how are we actually going to monitor and evaluate all these things that are going to go in? How are we going to work out whether these things actually work or not? And what do we mean by work? I know Max is passionate about running, walking, cycling, and she says she got no gold medals, but she is very enthusiastic. So Maxine, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Let's hope she's also able to remember to A, come off mute, and B, work the PowerPoint. Yeah, so thank you. Half my job's been done for me, I think, with those great presentations from Sarah and Pete, and there should be a lot of synergy within this one, I hope. The first thing that I wanted to highlight really is there is something of an evidence gap within active travel. What we need to be able to do is make the business case. And Sarah just made a great point about the same messages not working for everyone. But we need to make that business case. You're all on this seminar today, so I'm going to assume that everyone thinks active travel and more walking and cycling is a good idea. But we need to prove that. We need to show the benefits and the return on what that change in mode will do, basically. When we've looked at other regions and we've looked at national and international data as well, we often find that the evidence there can be quite patchy, it can be quite ad hoc. It's not always coordinated, it's not always strategic. And often it's quite short-term in nature. You often read a plan for active travel or a report. There are sometimes mentions to monitoring and evaluation within there. Sometimes it's a little box at the end saying, yeah, we'll monitor and evaluate this, but often very little follow-up information and very little published information on what was done, what worked for who, why things worked in particular. So that situation needs to improve. And because those projects are often short-term, baselines are sometimes captured, but before some of that longer-term data collection has been undertaken, and when people have looked at the change, before that change has been attributed directly to the project, things have moved on. The next fund's here, the next project's here. You know, priorities have changed. So there's a real need to address this evidence gap. Just in a nutshell, really, what the key components of measuring and understanding active travel and impact, it's all about getting more walkers and more cyclists, or existing walkers and cyclists, to do so more often, which will reduce the number of vehicles on the road. And that really is fundamental. If we have a really good understanding of those levels of active travel, then we can model some of the other impacts and the value of active travel. So if we know what the rate of travel is, we can start to look at things such as healthcare savings or some of the other economic benefits that are generated through active travel. So looking at across all those areas, the environmental impact, the emissions, the safety, looking at close past data, as Sarah said, working with South Yorkshire Police, looking at some of those health, well-being, social and community benefits of active travel are all part of this business case, which shows why people should be investing more and doing more to make it safer and easier for us all to travel via active means. So where I think we are now, and hopefully this syncs with what Sarah and Pete have said as well, we've got a great opportunity. Sarah talked through some of the implications of COVID, and the time is right now for a change. What I think we need to do is to take this a step at a time, basically. We don't need to go all tomorrow's world in a second. You know, we need to be looking at getting those basics right and building on those so we can strengthen that evidence base. One of the slides that Sarah showed with looking at rates of active travel was from the census 2011. And this is quite standard practice. A lot of regions will report census data from 10 years ago to show what active travel is in their region. You know, we move on every 10 minutes at the minute. So 10 years ago, you know, arguably is not the best baseline. So we need to get that right, and we need to look at layering up and bringing together different sources of data to give us that real clear picture on where we are in terms of active travel, and we can track that as we go on. So we can show that change, we can measure it, and we can show the impact from that. So I think what is needed, and you know, Sarah's sterling work over the last 2 years working with Pete has been about, there is a strategy in place, but it's not about a strategy here, it's about an action plan. It's about everybody working together and signing up towards the same aims and objectives. It needs for clear roles and responsibilities. I think we've all got, well, within our workplace or our wider life, we can probably all think of an example of where we all agree that something should happen, something's quite good, and we want to get to that point. But if there isn't an individual that's specifically tasked with that and given the resource and the role and the responsibility to do that, I think we often find that it doesn't happen, even though we all want it to. So that clear resource and that clear direction is needed. And then it's a case of building up that capacity as we go on, developing over time, and working together, reviewing and refining what we do, and learning and sharing the emergent findings from the work that's going on. I don't really think I need to cover this because I think Sarah did a great job for me, but it does need to be audience specific. The same messages don't work for everybody. So just thinking about the users and the public, what resonates with them, what's going to make a difference. They don't necessarily need the economic base there. They want to know about convenient, safe, affordable travel choices, about how they can move around, how they can feel safe, and what better routes are available. Sheffield City region or at any authority region, we need to understand about those journeys, what the purpose of those journeys are, and what would support people to make those journeys, and to establish minimum standards and planning and development that fits with that aim. So they need that strengthened evidence base, and they need to be working together at regional level. And then at wider society, and looking at different stakeholders, things like congestion levels, traffic management, air quality, pollution, economic benefits, healthcare savings, productivity, employability. These are all really important factors at that wider societal level. So when we're producing evidence, it needs to be the right evidence for the right people in the right way. And when we looked at Sheffield City region, this was kind of the approach that we used. We created a logic model. This is just a bit of an overview model, really, without the specifics on there. And it's from a bit of a health perspective. So what the issues are, what the rationale is. This is all about how our lifestyle and our behaviours is essentially causing unnecessary death. And what we need to do to change that. So step by step and piece by piece, we've got in place what inputs are needed, what activities are needed, what those will create, what those outputs are, and what the outcomes are. And the way we create these usually is by working backwards. So we'll look at the column on the right, we'll look at what we're trying to achieve. And in order for us to make that change, what do we need to do differently? And then map back across what activities, resources, support is needed to achieve those change. Because change doesn't happen by accident. It just doesn't suddenly occur. It needs to be planned and designed in. So in terms of the targets, these were flagged up a little bit in an earlier slide, but within the Sheffield City Region Plan, we've got those specific themes and those areas, and we're looking for more walkers and cyclists. We're looking for improved physical and mental health of residents and the population. We're looking to make sure things are safer and more environmentally friendly. And in order to know if those things are happening, there are certain outcomes that we need to set. So better air quality, less accidents, enhanced feelings of perceptions of safety. Some of the ONS national statistics, things about happiness, life quality, those kind of things. So they're all in place as part of a framework that we've got for measuring change and measuring the impact of increasing active travel. That change is all about finding out what's needed and what we want and designing and planning for that change together. The necessary resources and budget need to be in place, but also, importantly, is the political involvement and the leadership and the profile. I know Sarah and Dan Jarvis and other people are extremely passionate about this agenda, but it does need to be driven from the top as well. And the profile of active travel needs to be reinforced. So in terms of specifics, we've got, and you know, I would under no circumstance want to bore you with the detail of this today, but there are a number of diagrams, spreadsheets, tabs that look at all the indicators that we can measure to build up that evidence base to show what's happening in terms of active travel and what difference that makes. But in simple terms, we're looking at across those three levels. In the short term, this is a terrible thing to say with a Paralympic athlete who's been extraordinarily successful on the call as well. But in this case, we're not aiming straight for the gold. It's not what we need to do and where we need to be. We need to build up to this. So in contrast to Sarah's probably own personal beliefs, we're looking to get those basics right, those simple counts, how many people are traveling by different modes, to improve that baseline data there. Once we've got the basics in place, we're then looking to build up what else can we do? How can we collect more qualitative data? How can we find out more about what people want, what people need, what difference is being made there? And at that point, when we've established that, okay, we can go all tomorrow's world. We can look at video analytics. We can look at mobile phone data. We can look at more detailed interview with residents of Bike Lifesavers, surveys, of data sharing. It's all part of the plan, but we start small and we build up. That's the strategy behind this work. So just a quick slide at the end to summarize. It's all about those three levels, the bronze, silver, gold, starting with your route counters, your cordon counts, and then building up to those more technological aspects of it. We need to work together, create those economies of scale and have clear roles and responsibilities. And we need to start this now. We need everyone on the same page and everyone working together. Because to quote my boss's favorite phrase, if we do what we always do, we'll get what we've always got. So we need to make a change.
Maxine, thank you very much. Wow, you have got a lot of work to do by the looks of it, and I've seen the document that you've produced, which is absolutely fantastic. So, in terms of the how, are we going to see cameras everywhere? Are we going to be asking people to switch their smartphones on? Are we going to have a lot of people with clipboards standing at traffic lights? What do you see happening in the next few years in terms of working out whether this is working or not?
I think unless this weather's going to pick up a little bit, people standing with clipboards is not going to pan out well at all. But joking aside, there is technology that's out there already in the region. There are automated counters. There's hardware there that we can utilise. So it's about connecting things up and making better use of the data that's available and enhancing that data where it needs to be improved. It is, as I mentioned, a case of kind of bringing things together. There's no big, no silver bullet that's going to measure everything and do everything for us. So it's a case of bringing different data sets together to show that picture. So there is still a need for, weather permitting, for people to be on the street doing some manual counts and some intercept surveys. There are other opportunities like, I think it was launched this week, the Beat the Street campaign, which is running across 3 of the 4 South Yorkshire regions, which creates opportunities. As part of that process, a lot of data on how people travel to work and school and within their localities is collected. So it's about using those data sources and bringing those together and creating added value from those. So it's not one single solution. It's needing to do a bit of all those things. And I think in the next few years, there's definitely technology there in terms of video and mobile data that will give us really good insight on this. But I think we get the basic things right first, and then we build up to those.
Thanks, Maxine. Right, we've got loads of questions coming down through the chat, and there's a lot of kind of chatter going on. And I'd like to kind of go back to a really early question from DVE. I think I know who that might be, but I know a DVE. Why does it seem so difficult to deliver excellent cycle paths, e.g. Dutch style, in our region? And a bit further down, we've got Nigel having an excellent detailed comment about this LTN 120 that you talked about. So Sarah and Pete, how do we make sure that the stuff we put in is good? Because people, you know, if you cycle around Sheffield, you know there's some really bad stuff out there. So how do we make sure that it's good?
That was one of the first things that we set out. And if you go back to that first slide where my pledges were, was that we needed to make sure that we built infrastructure that exceeded standards, that was just far better than the status quo we've been putting in. Shoddy bike lanes have plagued the entire country for far too long. Painting white lines does not create infrastructure, it's just an afterthought. And so if you see a painted bike lane, it's not something that we've approved by any stretch. Some things go in because they've been planned, and one of the frustrations is how long it takes from inception to delivery, and that is a challenge across the country. So we have to build good standard bike lanes, and they are coming. It's just that the better they are, the more the process that Pete explained takes time, because we're talking about finite amount of space, and we're trying to take as much of that space as we can for active means. So we need pavements, footways to be, Pete will give you the measurements because I always get confused with these numbers, but we need to make sure that if it's a bi-directional cycle lane, it's big enough to allow 2 non-standard cycles to pass with ease. We need to make sure the footway is wide enough so that those pedestrians can walk side by side and fall out into groups to have a conversation. Because you don't point a finger at a vehicle driver and saying, well, you're sat side by side chatting, so why shouldn't I? And it's really important that we look at the human element of this. So we can and we will build good Dutch style cycle lanes, but we need to put it through a process and make sure that it happens properly. And in terms of the amount of space and LTN 120 being a step up, absolutely. But as Pete pointed out, so much of the space that we say isn't available is currently utilised to park furniture that isn't necessary, whether that's a vehicle being parked somewhere because the owner has decided it's their right to park it on the public highway, or whether it's, you know, a signpost that's in the way or something. And people with disabilities, visually impaired people, really struggle with the amount of clutter on our pavements. And it's something that the Living Streets organisation are working really hard to highlight and to bring to people's attention that pavement clutter is a real danger to pedestrians, and especially those people with disabilities.
So I haven't seen anything here, but one of the questions that gets asked of me quite a lot is, you know, low traffic neighborhoods, active travel neighborhoods. Oh, it just causes more problems than it's worth. You know, ambulances can't get there, fire engines can't get in. Is there any evidence yet to show what the truth is around these active travel neighborhoods, about what actually works and what the benefits are? What are we chasing? What are we looking forward to?
Steve, you missed the earlier seminar this week. So Dr. Rachel Aldred did some work in Waltham Forest. I think the first thing is lots of people complaining about emergency services are not from the emergency services. So everybody will remember the Shalesmoor ambulance incident during lockdown. And what Rachel has shown is that actually the fire service and emergency services times have improved in Waltham Forest, where they built the active neighbourhood, the low traffic neighbourhood there, and all of these proposals go through consultation with the emergency services. So it's not something that's been put in that they don't know about. And the other thing that's really important to recognise is that what happened in Waltham Forest was there was a bigger reduction in vehicle ownership than anywhere else. It was about 6% reduction of vehicles. That's the parked vehicles. The vehicle use went down as well. And there's lots of complaints about dispersed traffic onto other roads. That is a short-term thing. The trips go away. And I think there's a really important thing here that in 1996, we knew if you built bigger roads, they fill up with more traffic. That what wasn't publicised was the corollary of that. If you take vehicle space away, some of the trips disappear. That the amount of vehicle trips is not a given, it's a choice. And we can look at that frightening graph that you elicited before we started this programme. A quarter of it's under 500 metres taken by car. And we think, how on earth is that possible? And I look out the front of my house as a post box. Now, the mesh density of post boxes is very high. The number of people that drive to the post box to post a letter is frighteningly high. The number of people that drive to the local shop to get their newspaper, the number of people that drive to take their pet for a walk, and that all of these journeys are the ones that make those very short trips. Now, I don't want to try and lead some kind of brigade that starts complaining about everybody else's trips. It's our trips we need to deal with, because we're the people that can drive that change. If we start slinging mud, it doesn't get us anywhere.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Chris Cutforth, who's been great in the chat. Is there any scope for commercial sponsorship of any of this work? Do we want to go there? Does that happen? Do we have any? I mean, I'm thinking in America, if you've been to America, sometimes you get highways sponsored by Pete Z, sponsored this highway. Do you think we'll ever get there?
I think it's very easy to think, it's all about the infrastructure, but you just have to go back to the now Santander bikes and the Barclays bikes. That was a huge sponsorship deal. So of course, there's loads of ways we can get the commercial sector involved in this. And I suppose the other thing to recognise, Sarah and I talk about this quite a lot. People don't go to the Netherlands and say, "Oh, that's the economic poorhouse of Europe," do we? And the number of trips by bike there in somewhere like Groningen is about 45%. So that actually places work really, really well with lots and lots of bikes, and the industry slightly changes, and the retail mix slightly changes. So the commerciality of having activity built into our neighbourhoods is there, and of course we can help with the local authorities getting it to the door. But it's the new housing developments. I see Maxine's been talking about Harworth. It's the businesses. They need to build their infrastructure to meet it and work it out. So yes, there's loads of ways the private sector can be involved. If any company wants to say, "I'll give you £1 million to make more people cycle," we'll find a way of spending it.
In terms of, I know Sarah, Pete, you might have mentioned this. So just remind us, what's the spend on active travel that we're going to see within Sheffield, within the Sheffield City region in the next few years? So again, just remind us, what are we likely to see happening so that we know how to get involved and what to talk about?
So actually, Steve, that's a slightly difficult question. We get into a bit of a Donald Rumsfeld space about the known knowns and the unknown knowns, in that actually there's tons of spending going on stuff, certainly on some of the pavement stuff that I wouldn't know about. I can tell you about what's going through the city region books, most of it, but some of it I can't, you know, in some of the housing development funding. So for instance, if you look at the Greater Green stuff in Sheffield Centre, that was funded by a different pot of money. It wasn't transport spend. And we have things like the Towns Fund, which is going to local authorities and areas, which isn't coming through the city region. So what I'll give you is about £100 million in the next 2 years, about £80 million of transforming cities, just over £7 million of active travel fund, and then there's a whole load of other bits and bobs of funding that are brought from Get Britain Building. So there's lots and lots of different funds. I think one of the useful things to look at it is, if the scheme is right, then we have to find the money to build it. And I know that people on this call, I know John was saying he's got a neighbourhood he'd like to do. What we have to do is get that into the pipeline from the city council point of view, who own the roads, and then it's our job to find even more funding to try and create it. So 80 million in the next couple of years. If we get that 2040 map, it's over 200 million pounds a year. So, which means if we're starting from a slow start, we're going to have to get up into the 300-400 million pounds a year spend to deliver that across the city region.
Sarah, can I just go right back to, I suppose, the overall kind of philosophy of this particular thing? You know, we've had COVID. Is it? Are we in a new normal? Are we just going to go back to the way we were? What's your thought on what will actually happen as things open up? Do you think we're going to have a new normal? Do you think we've learned some lessons and have some opportunities that we can actually deliver on?
Well, I think one of the things that we've seen is that as we have started to open up, and even, you know, without the massive traffic, vehicle traffic drop in lockdown 3, is that people are already more reliant on motor vehicles than we would like. And that partly depends on the recovery of the public transport system and the investment in that. And I know there's a lot of work being done by colleagues on, you know, both trains and buses to make sure that those parts of our transport system really do recover to enable us, because active travel is a significant part of those journeys that we're first mile and last mile. We help to connect journeys. So it's really important that we see those recover as well, so that the confidence of the population returns and people can start to do longer journeys. And I did a journey back on the train to London the other day, and e-bike, Pendolino and Javelin train, and it was the best thing ever. And I can't deny that there wasn't an element of, oh, is it going to be okay? And there is that anxiety. We've all been kind of made to feel a little bit anxious about whether we reach out of our bubble. And I've got my first trip on a plane soon to the World Championships, and again, that you know, conjures up levels of anxiety. But I think there's an appetite there that we saw demonstrated in lockdown 1, and I don't think people have forgotten that, because lots of people using their car feel like they're, you know, I wish I wasn't, I don't want to, and I'd like to move away from this and see a better normal. So I don't think we're going to see it immediately. We've got a lot of work to do, and there's places, hard to reach places, that we still have to really, really focus on reaching those people, the people who are living in the highest levels of deprivation with the least amount of opportunity. And those people deserve our attention and deserve the resource to be placed there. And I think that's some of the things that the councils are attempting to do, make sure they can reach those people so that they're not left behind and they have as many opportunities. Across South Yorkshire, 1/3 of households don't have access to a car, and the trend on car ownership is reducing, which is obviously welcome and needs to happen, especially as we make the switch to e-vehicles.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. That I think that's our closing comments, actually, because we've hit the 2 o'clock deadline to finish off. Just a reminder that this will be on the AWRC YouTube channel, so be able to post it to your friends. For those of you who weren't live on the session, hello, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Sarah, Pete, Maxine. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your time. Thanks to Jen Parry for putting it all together and keeping us all shipshape. So remember to check out the website. So if Jen just puts up our last slide, if you look on the bottom right, there's a website there. There's the various social media channels. Our next presentation is the Olympics Elite Support for Elite Sport. And we'll be telling you a little bit about some of the superb research that's going on in the AWRC to support Olympic athletes and Paralympic athletes in Tokyo. So again, thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy your weekend. Goodbye.